Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. It's great to be here again for yet another session in the A4Q World Congress. I'm delighted to have with me Debra Paul from Assist Knowledge Development, and I think you're going to be absolutely enthralled by what she has to say. If you've got any questions, please put them in the comments box, and we'll ask Debbie at the end of the session. We'll give you a little reminder about that as she's talking. And I'm not going to hold things up any further and pass over to Debbie to introduce herself and to also share the content of her presentation. Thanks, Debbie.
Okay, thanks very much, Debbie, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the World Congress. I'm really excited about this. So, as Debbie said, I'm the Managing Director of Assist Knowledge Development, and what I'm really excited to talk to everybody about is the concept of service and service thinking and the theory behind it as well. So that's going to be the subject of my talk. Now, I've worked in IT and change, as I call our industry, for quite a few decades, actually. And I think the last few years has been the time when I have seen so much development, so much new technology. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about this as a bit of an intro to my thinking, because it really feels to me that there's just words coming at me, techniques coming at me, new technologies coming at me. And I don't know about everybody else, but sometimes I just think, gosh, stop the world, because there is so much going on. And how do I respond and react to that, given what is also happening in the world environment? But one of the things I've noticed is that sometimes you get a sense that people working in our industry and often maybe senior executives rush us towards new ideas, new techniques. And sometimes it can feel that there's almost a sense of hysteria that we have to have this new technology, we have to use this new approach. And I question whether that is good. Is that helpful? And this is one of the aspects I want to talk about. And I sometimes call this shiny toy syndrome. And within the concept of service, is this a good idea? But before I look at that, I also want to look at one of the other responses that I've noticed over the last few years. And that is this, that we seem to have a proliferation of new job titles and new job roles constantly coming at us too. And I ask myself, is this sensible? Is this helpful? And the answer in some situations might be yes, but I've lost count of the number of discussions, even seminars I've attended, where people in our industry are saying, what does this job role actually mean? And one of the things that brought this home to me a couple of years ago was I was actually working with somebody and his job title was portfolio architect. And I said to him, what do you do as a portfolio architect? And he said, well, it's really strange because I seem to do the same that I used to do when I was a business analyst, but I've got this new job role title. But the problem is nobody understands it. And I think it's worthwhile just unpicking some of that, because we're now living in a world where we have to collaborate a lot. And there's a problem if we don't understand the disciplines that we're collaborating with. So just to go a little bit into theory, and I'm going to apologize in advance, but there's a little bit of theory in this talk. If you actually unpick where the concept of a role comes from, it actually comes from the world of the theatre. Now, this image that is in front of you is actually a still from something called The Play That Goes Wrong, which is a very, very funny play. But the key thing about this play, and one of the reasons why I chose this image, is it really makes the point about a role. Because in the theatre, roles are directed. And that doesn't just mean they're discussed and an idea of what it's about. They're scripted. People know exactly what to say. They're told where to stand, so it's all positioned. And if you look at that particular image, you can see that everybody's in a very specific place. What's more, they all know how the others are going to behave and react. So if this is where the concept of roles comes from, is there a problem that we don't use roles in a very specific way? And I'm not saying we want to be directed and scripted, but sometimes we seem to go to the opposite extreme. I just want to give you a couple of examples, because I do things like look up role descriptions using Google, and I go to Wikipedia or I go to other sites to say, well, how do they describe roles? So here's a couple of role definitions that I found, one for business analysis and one for technical architects. And the thing with these definitions is this: if you read them and you are within our industry, you might find yourself nodding along and saying, yeah, I get that. Okay. But what if you're not? Or what if you're in a particular discipline that hasn't worked with a business analyst or a technical architect? What if you're in a different part of the industry? Does it then make sense? Does it explain to you, if I'm working within today's world with somebody taking on that role, what is that going to mean for me? And I want to pick out a few words. So looking at the business analysis one first, there's a statement about solutions that deliver value to stakeholders. And when we look at the service thinking world, we can unpick that statement and actually ask ourselves, is that a valid statement to actually state? So I'm going to come back to this concept about solutions that deliver value in a little while. But if we look at the next point in red, how on earth does an enterprise articulate anything? And what are needs? You know, if you're not in the IT or change or information systems business, what on earth does that mean to you? Similarly, I love the word help in this sentence about technical architects, because I could argue that we all help. We all get involved to help plan, design, and build IT systems for clients. So what does that tell us? And the interesting thing is that that point actually came from the UK National Careers Service. And interestingly, there was a study done recently that actually identified that this lack of clarity around defining roles is a problem. Because if you have what is called role ambiguity, then you have a lot of misunderstanding. You also have a lot of turf wars. You have a lot of people being expected to do things when they don't think that's what they should be doing. In some of the research I did, you also have a lot of people playing and performing roles in our industry where they're not sure what they should be doing. And the problem is, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, our industry gets quite a lot of criticism for failed projects and all sorts of problems with systems and with business changes just not doing what they're supposed to do. And if we have this ambiguity, it just doesn't help. On the other side of that, if there's more role clarity, and I'm going to go on to explain how the service thinking world can help with this, then we have a clear value proposition. We have clear expectations. People know where it is our service offering lies. And interestingly, this study, which was conducted by the Learning and Work Institute, actually came out and said that there is a digital skills problem. I mean, it was based in the UK, but I think it's broader than that. And that problem has a few particular aspects underlying it. And one of it was the lack of clarity of definition of roles in the IT and change industry. And so if we're really thinking about, well, what is it that we want to do in terms of offering a service, actually thinking about how we define what we do is a good place to start. But there is another issue here as well, because I don't know about those of you who are watching and listening, but quite often in my career, there has been this situation where people working in our industry have had to establish credibility. And establishing credibility can be very difficult when you're working within a role where people don't know what to expect from you. And there has been research into this that has raised something called a role set issue. And what that says is that if you're working within a role set and you work on a project or on a project development and you do a really great job, And the tendency is for people to think that individual is really good. But they don't necessarily think that role that was part of this particular project went really well. On the other hand, if an individual doesn't do a good job, you tend to find that it is the role that is dismissed. So we're in a complete bind here where almost you can't win. And so the only way around it is to make sure that we understand our roles and we define them clearly. And the service view of the world helps us to do that. So I want to come back now to look at this concept of value, because there is something abroad that I find all the time, which I call the value fallacy. And it's this: we have statements constantly being targeted at us, and we find ourselves saying them. I found myself saying it on a podcast recently because it's almost ingrained in our way of thinking now, which is we do this and we deliver value. And not only are we delivering value, our solutions are delivering value, and we're providing early delivery of value. I've heard the phrase Agile delivers value early so many times. And if you look at the service view of the world, you need to unpick this and ask yourself, actually, is that accurate? Is that statement actually correct? So let's have a look at what the concept of value is actually about. Now, we might say, well, if we've delivered a product or a solution that has all the features that are wanted, that's highly usable and accessible, that is handed over and installed at the point when it's needed, and therefore has the potential to offer benefits, is that delivering value? Well, I want to tell you a couple of stories about this. So a couple of years ago, I bought my mum a smartphone. And the reason I bought it for her was because she had a very old phone and it had a screen that was very, very small and it didn't have a keyboard of any sort. And so it was a nightmare to use. But more than that, she needed to use some apps because she needed to communicate members of the family around the world. And so I bought her the smartphone and was really pleased with this, gave it to her, showed her the touch screen, said, this is going to be marvelous for you because, you know, it brings up a keyboard, you'll be able to type in messages, absolutely terrific. 3 months later, I went to visit and noticed that the old phone was back in action. So I asked her, where's your new phone? And it was upstairs, locked away in a drawer. And when I asked why, it was because it was out of battery. And when I asked why it hadn't been charged, well, actually, it was because she'd actually never used it. And the reason she hadn't used it was because she found it difficult to get to grips with, because the transition from the old phone to the new was just too much. So how much value did I actually deliver? I mean, I gave her a solution that was great. The features were all there. In my terms, it was highly usable. She got it when she needed it. But in terms of benefits, it just didn't happen. So that's an individual example, but I want to give you an organizational one as well. I know somebody really well who runs a software company, and the company has a product that is sold worldwide, is very highly regarded in a particular industry. And this particular product, a few years ago, they decided they were going to adopt Scrum for its development. And the product owner had a set of features on the backlog, and they went about enhancing the product and delivering it out to their customers. And what was interesting was two things that happened. And the first one was directly related to the approach. And basically, a number of their customers started complaining. And they were complaining of the disruptive effect of having new versions of the product too often. And they asked the company to stop, or at the very least to stop delivering the new versions to them, because they said in terms of their work and embedding it within the processes and the way they dealt with their customers, it was so disruptive that it was actually stopping them from using the product. The second thing that happened was that they found that they sold the product, but the annual license fee wasn't being renewed by a significant number of customers. And this was quite important for the organisation, because obviously that's quite an important income stream. So when they investigated with those customers, they discovered that the product had been installed and had never been used. Now, I've come across this a number of times in my career, and I'm sure many of you have, but I sort of thought we'd got away from that a little bit, but apparently not, because this is a very recent example. And so when they talked to the customers about why they weren't using it, they said because they just needed to make so many other changes, and it was just too much effort to do that. So they bought the product, didn't use it, never renewed the license. Now, in that situation, again, you have to ask yourself, there's the product, it's got the features, but did it actually deliver value? And the thing we have to remember is that value is determined by the recipient. And when we keep saying we're delivering value, we're going against some of the premises of service thinking. And actually, we're saying things that in reality, a lot of people are finding does not pan out and it's not correct. And so we need to think about exactly what we mean by this and how we can overcome the difficulties with this concept of value. So if we look at the service mindset and service science underpins the service thinking approach. It's an emergent body of knowledge and theory. It's based on theoretical and empirical research. And it looks at what we actually mean by the term service. And it's slightly confusing because we talk about services as things we do deliver. And this is a higher level concept about the nature of service itself. And it looks at how different, what it calls entities or service systems, interact to engage in co-creation of value. So you can deliver the service in the same way you can deliver the product, but the value has to be co-created. And service science has actually been defined sometimes as the study of value co-creation. And it looks at bringing together different disciplines. So in an industry like ours, where we have all these different disciplines that need to understand each other, as I mentioned in terms of roles, but also need to work together and understand how individuals and organizations as service systems interact and how that allows us to deliver service and hopefully co-create value. This is right at the heart of the service view of the world. This is a definition of service. And what I like about this definition particularly is it contains two important concepts. One is the sense of resources that are integrating with others to create value with and for the benefit of another. So we're working to actually integrate our resources, our capability, if you like, in order to co-create that value with others. And if we think about service in that way, and then we apply it into our industry, you can see how it's different from delivering a product or delivering a service that actually does something. So the service view is very much based on customers. It's based on customer centricity. It looks at what is the customer experience. And it doesn't say, hey, customers, have we got some value for you? It actually says, here is the service that is offered, and it has a value proposition. And that concept of proposition is really, really important, because within our organizations or our projects or our product development teams or what it is, we can propose value. But until we actually engage and understand customers, and of course in our industry, we have lots of different levels of customer. And until we can think about the customer experience to work with us, then we can't co-create the value. And that's when we end up with software companies with software sitting somewhere on a machine, not used, and no beneficial outcomes appearing. So again, sorry about this, a slightly theoretical viewpoint, but what the theory of service sign talks about is contrasting goods dominant logic, which is related to value in exchange, with service dominant logic, which is related to value in use. And what that means is goods dominant logic has been historically the way we have looked at value. If we hand over something and we're given money or something else in return, we have a value in exchange. And what service science is now challenging is this concept. And it's saying, actually, we should be looking at realization of value. And you can only realize value if you use the delivered products or goods and services. And that is value in use. So to look at a very simple example, if I was to buy a light bulb and I hand over money and I have a light bulb in exchange, that is value in exchange. But I can't realize value. I don't actually have a beneficial outcome until I put the light bulb in a socket and turn the light on and light appears. And that is value in use. So this concept of actually using something and working with what is delivered to actually have value is very important. And as a result, we have to understand that we can deliver products and services. But remember, this higher level concept of service is about benefit for another, and that has to be co-created value. This is a process that I developed as a high-level overview as how we might go about value co-creation. And I'm sure you've all seen something very similar to this, but it's worthwhile understanding this process because it is all based on co-creation and collaboration. And it starts off by looking at a collaboration where we're co-creating to understand and identify where it's possible that value might be achieved. And of course, what this is about is really understanding that we don't just leap in with our shiny toys. We don't just say, have I got a technology for you? We actually understand, well, what is it we're addressing here? What's the problem? What is this situation we're looking at where there's a possibility that if we do something, there could be a beneficial outcome? Only then does it move on to thinking about, okay, we need to now come up with the solution that can offer the value that we've identified in our earlier step. But even then, and no matter how much we collaborate, we iterate, we co-create within that development stage, if we don't follow that through to collaborate to ensure that value is realized, then there is no value delivered. And this is what's happened in the example of the software company and the example of my mum with her smartphone, is there was no collaboration to ensure that value was realized, and hence a product was developed and delivered, but no value came out of it. So the service thinking approach takes this view. It looks at working with customers and other entities within an interacting system that actually is based on co-creation and collaboration to make sure that we're just not all wasting our time and that we are actually moving towards something that has the potential to be beneficial and hopefully then to realize that. And as well as the service thinking approach, there's an aligned thinking approach that is also really relevant here, and this is design thinking. And I'm sure many of you have come across both of these approaches. But design thinking ties in so neatly with service thinking to actually help this situation as well. So if we look at one of the most typical and often used design thinking frameworks, the UK Design Council's Double Diamond, you can see that even just looking at it at this very overview level, you've got a problem space and you have a solution space. So within the problem space, you're uncovering, you're gathering insights, you're engaging initially in divergent, expansive thinking to think broadly about what exactly is going on before converging into understanding exactly what our problem is, or what our challenge really is about, or where the opportunities lie even. And this ties in with working collaboratively to co-create an understanding of the value that might be available if we work through the value co-creation process with customers and with other disciplines. And then the double diamond moves into the solution space, where we're now again thinking expansively and divergently. We're testing and trying, we're using prototyping, we're experimenting to try and understand, well, what is a solution going to look like that's really good here? Where is there a solution that has the potential for value that might be realized? And then we can converge in by building, and again, by trying it out, getting feedback, adapting. So you're in a strong feedback loop again, and you're iterating in order to make sure that ultimately there is a co-creation of value and there is a realization of a beneficial outcome for customers. So within the business change and IT world, I think service science has got a lot to offer us. It causes us to take a step back and think about the different disciplines, these different interacting entities that is sometimes known as an ecosystem. How do they all work together? What is it they're contributing? How are we going to collaborate in order to make sure that what ensues is value that's been co-created and that actually has some justification in practice and is realized? So actually offers something to the people that we're working with. I just wanted to show you this quickly as an example. This is a framework I developed for the business analysis community, which looks at using service as a way of clarifying roles. And this is a suite of services, you might call it a portfolio, that a business analysis community might use in order to define what they offer. And the reason I wanted to show it to you is twofold. Firstly, the terminology and the language I've tried to use here was actually developed with customers of business analysts who tend to be internal customers. And the second thing was that the words underneath the titles are actually the value propositions. And this framework has been used and adopted in a number of different ways. It's intended to be adapted, not to be taken straight out of the box. But it is a way that I think we could look at a lot of different disciplines and roles within our IT and change industry in order to maybe clarify exactly what there is doing and to tie in with a service view of the world and understanding value proposition and moving away from value delivery. So the service view of the world is very much a customer-centric view. It aligns very nicely with understanding value and understanding value proposition. It also aligns with approaches like design thinking, which are also highly customer-centric. And, you know, to me, they also allow us to think, not to rush at the newest developments or the shiny toys, maybe to challenge when people say we have to use this. I think a statement that was said to me a year ago was, we're Agile, we always follow Scrum. And I thought, if I'm following a method, I'm not applying to context and I'm not thinking. And actually, I've never found a method or a technique that I didn't have to adapt in some situation. And the service thinking view tells us to think and to take that step back and really understand what is it we're trying to achieve and what's the best way to do it. And I'm a great believer in thinking. And I just wanted to share with you that I'm in good company, because actually these people are far more skilled, expert people than I could ever be. But thinking is something they praise as well. And so I do recommend it to you. And I recommend service thinking and design thinking as an approach. So just to summarize, a service view offers a basis for this clarity around roles, and it's highly focused on customers. It aligns with design thinking, which is iterative, also customer-centric, and really offers opportunities for innovation. And please let's remember that products and services are delivered and value is co-created and realized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie. Taking away the kind of collaborative co-creation of value as a real statement there, but also realization of value. Really great insight. Questions for you. The service view of the world. In an organisation, where does this start? Does it start with the board? How do you start to create the service thinking culture in an organisation, if you like?
That's a brilliant question. I think it depends so much on the organisation, but where I have observed it, it does seem to be taking hold within some, I never know whether it's the IT division or the change division or what we're going to call it, but that division somewhere in an organisation is where I've seen it now being adopted. There are some organisations that are now talking about actually bringing on a new role, sadly, but it is a role called service designer, interestingly enough. And the intent is to pull together collaborative teams, multidisciplinary teams, where you've got individual expertise, but you've also got that interaction. And I've seen this happening in a number of organizations, actually quite large organizations, where they're adopting that service view to actually look at, well, what is it we do? We can't just deliver software enhancements or, new items of software or new products or new processes. We've got to look at this a little bit more holistically. And that is where I think the drive is coming from. I think, my shiny toy syndrome, I think a lot of organizations are recognizing that maybe there's been a bit of a tendency around that for a while, and we need to take that step back. But I do think it is in the change in IT disciplines and in those divisions where it's happening. And I do know of some business analysis practices where they've been leading the charge. Interestingly, I actually did some consultancy recently working with a company where they were doing this. And I ran a workshop with the senior executives across the change in IT division, which is a very large division, talked them through some of the concepts I've just discussed on this talk. And they said, that's exactly what we want. And I said, hooray. So I do think it's our industry. Interestingly, the whole service science thing, there was a lot of it that started around the marketing world, because you can tell that from its customer centricity. But I've seen a lot of research now moving it into our world. IBM actually did a lot of initial research with it, but I've seen, various papers now looking at it within an information systems context. And that's where I'm seeing it really taking place.
You mentioned customer experience in one of the slides. So how does customer experience relate a little bit more? Can you give me a little bit more insight into that? And also an interesting one, something that popped up earlier, was about return on investment. So when people are talking about CX, they're often looking for a return on investment. And it's one of the questions which I thought, when we're talking about service thinking, how would that apply there too?
Right. Well, let's do the customer experience piece first and then have a look at return on investment. Customer experience is a really interesting area because I think in our world, we talk a lot about user experience. Mm-hmm. And you may have noticed, other than now, I didn't use the word user in that presentation. And the reason is because if you're looking at service, you've got to look at a bit beyond the user of a software product. You've got to think bigger and broader, because even organizations where it's all about a software platform, they have to have something that is to do with people, because at the very least, your customers are people. But, customers have situations where sometimes they have issues that have to be addressed. And so you have to take a bit more of a holistic view. And so the service view of the world is customer centric. It looks at, if you have customers, if you want to help them realize value from this, it's got to be more than just how they integrate and interface with a software product. So you've then got to think about, okay, as an organization, what I call the wraparound. What's the wraparound process around the software product? What then is the people aspect that goes around that? And that's where the customer experience comes in. And that's when you're really thinking about, well, okay, how do we co-create in this context? Because we co-create with people, not with software. You know, at the end of the day, it's people buying from people and engaging with people. So that's where that comes in. And I think the other thing we also have to think about, and I don't know if any of you ever use the Kano model, which is looking at different priorities, but it's absolutely marvelous because that looks at things like delighters, which is where we're really taking the customer experience to another level. And of course, some of this then taps into return on investment. Because actually, if you think of that software company that I mentioned, they've put a huge amount of investment into that product, but they've got a significant number of customers not renewing, not paying the license. Now, if you think you've sold a software product into a company, and it's quite an expensive product, and then there is this annual ongoing return, and there isn't, that annual return doesn't happen, you have a major issue. And so actually understanding embedding products, understanding the service that it offers to the organization, and understanding the realization of value, that's absolutely critical in that context, because without it, your ROI is going to stop very, very quickly. So it comes in lots of different areas. I mean, I think, again, coming back to the customer experience, if you are engaging with customers, if you are having return customers, you can see the marketing element here, can't you? You know, if customers want to come back to working with your organization, you've got a much longer term prospect of ROI than if you're just doing something in the short term, delivering a product, and actually people then say it was okay or we didn't use it.
Just, Debbie, as you're speaking, we're getting so many comments from people to say, fantastic presentation. People from around the world saying that really appreciated. Thank you for Maria from Macedonia as an example. So Czech Republic, first time attending a Congress, amazing event. Thank you. Brilliant. So thank you to everybody. Clarita, great presentation. Deborah, thank you a lot. Thank you for everybody for taking the time to write the comments, and Edith too. It's much appreciated. Debbie, so I was thinking, can you give me perhaps an example of where you've used it, as we say in English, in anger, where you used this in anger yourself, perhaps, or seen it used in anger? Sorry, that's a very UK phrase, basically.
In practice. Yes, I can. And this is one of those topics that I'm just going to say it as an introduction and I won't mention it again. But a year ago in the UK, it closed down, basically. Now, I run a company, and when you run a company, you can't wait for data to tell you what to do. You just can't. We're coming back to ROI to a certain extent here. You have to be ahead of the game. You have to be looking at what's coming up. And I could see what was coming. Okay. So a couple of weeks before actually the formal lockdown, I got together with 3 of my colleagues and said, okay, I run a training company that runs courses in classrooms. I can apply my service thinking to that till I'm blue in the face. Sorry, another UK phrase, but it's not going to work. So now what we're going to do is we're going to apply service thinking and design thinking, and we're going to pivot our company. Okay. And that afternoon, we sat there, 4 of us, and we devised a complete strategy for pivoting the company. We devised it on the basis of what is the service ultimately that we're trying to offer. I'm a training company. People want to learn. The service is learning. Classroom is a channel or a mechanism. Okay, we don't have that available, but we do have others. So we now focus on that customer centricity, and we now make sure we design, and we use design thinking in order to deliver a service. So what we did is we came out with our thoughts, our ideas. We came out with an overview of a set of services that would allow us to deliver the service we wanted to deliver. We then split up into groups, and some of us went off and we went through prototyping, we went through trying it out on each other. We went through all sorts of different processes, feeding back, adapting constantly. Some of my other colleagues then went out and talked to different other types of customers and said, this is what we're doing, what do you think? And it's been incredible. I mean, it's been such a difficult year around the world and still is, but in terms of using those techniques, it was just astonishing, absolutely astonishing. And we really felt that it gave us an incredible edge.
So this was applying service thinking and then using specific design thinking techniques as a way to actually, as you say, pivot your organization. Yeah. So it was in a good state of not just readiness, but ready to implementing this new way of working.
And interestingly, because this comes back to marketing as well, we also decided, well, if we're going to do it, let's really do it. So we rebranded every single course as well. And we did it incrementally because, you know, I'm a great one for incremental delivery. I think it de-risks everything. But, you know, sometimes in our industry, we're great at applying it to our customers. This was actually an example where I had to apply it to us. And it is such a powerful set of techniques. It's such a powerful thinking approach that my colleagues who do not work in change and IT, well, put it this way, they've never used the phrase value delivery ever again. Not in my hearing anyway. They're convinced.
You mentioned incremental. How does Agile fit in with this whole service thinking world?
Well, Agile fits with it really well, as long as you think Agile and you don't think following method. I mean, I am a bit of a maverick in that the words following method, I'm afraid I just can't do it. It's just not possible for me. But, you know, Agile is about working closely with customers, about collaboration and co-creation. That's exactly where Agile is sitting. I'm talking about iteration because, you know, you can have an outline of what you want. And we did. And when I've worked with other organizations, they've often had an outline of what they're trying to achieve. You might call them the high-level requirements, if you like. But ultimately, when you're right within that work, to be prepared to try something and to say to people, how does this look? Let's take that feedback. And to me, if Agile, incredibly powerful.
Service thinking skills. You know, if somebody's thinking, I'm really liking the sound of this, I want to know a little bit more.
I've been studying